Hey friends, cost of production refers to the cost incurred to purchase a factor of production, which refers to land, labor, capital, as well as knowledge. So for example, if I own a business selling wooden tables, some of the cost of production can include things like hiring workers to build and sell my tables, or maybe the farmland required to grow wood for my tables. And as we see in this diagram, there are two types of economic costs. You have what we call explicit costs as well as implicit costs. Explicit costs, which is the first one over here, are incurred when a firm buys resources that it does not own. Workers' salaries are an example of explicit costs because we do not own workers, we need to hire them. Next, we can think of implicit costs as opportunity costs over here. Implicit costs are incurred when the firm uses resources it already owns and as a result sacrifices potential income. So for example, going back to my wooden business example, if I own some land to grow my trees to make my tables, this is an implicit cost. Because in theory, I could have sold this wood from my trees to other businesses and other wood manufacturers to get income. And I could have potentially used this land to gain income. But because I'm using this wood and this land to make my own tables, there is some degree of opportunity cost incurred. And this is a form or an example of implicit costs. So economic costs of production refer to the sum of both explicit as well as implicit costs. And unlike revenue, costs can be split into both short-run as well as long-run costs. Short-run refers to a period of time when at least one factor of production is fixed and unchanged. Long-run refers to the period of time when all of the factors of production are variable and therefore can be changed. Because factors of production can be changed in the long run, naturally, the cost of these factors of production can also be different in the long run versus in the short run. Total costs, which I label as TC, refers to all of the costs of production incurred by a firm. Average costs refer to the cost per unit of output produced. So as with our revenue example earlier, to get the average cost, you divide the total cost by the quantities of output produced. And unlike the revenue example or explanation earlier, we take note of the output which is produced and not the output which is sold, because these two output values can be different. Lastly, marginal costs, MC, they refer to the additional costs of producing one additional unit of output. And once again, you can calculate all three types of costs by simply knowing the total cost and the quantity of outputs. Do take note of the relationship between average cost, AC, as well as marginal cost, MC, in the short run. So this is the diagram that the textbook uses to illustrate the relationship between two curves. You may need to know this diagram for paper 3, but let me just explain to you quickly what this diagram refers to. So basically, when the marginal cost curve lies below the average cost curve, which is this point over here, the average cost falls, right? And which is why the slope of the average cost seems to point downwards. And in contrast, when the marginal cost curve lies above the average cost curve, which is this point over here, we see how the average cost actually increases, right? So the average cost AC curve goes up. Why is this the case? Well, if you think about it logically, this is because the next item, the next cost, the next unit of production influences our total average. If we use test scores as an example, let's imagine your current test score is about 80. If your newest test score is 90, this would increase the overall average test score to be above 80. So a marginal cost that is higher than the average cost would increase the overall average cost. And the opposite would also be the case. And this explains the relationship between the marginal cost and the average cost curves. Now, in the long run, all of the factors of production are variable and therefore they can be changed. So this means that the long-run cost of production is the cost per unit of output when all factors of production are changed. And this is how the long-run average cost curve looks like. The shape of the long-run average cost curve stems from a concept called economies of scale. Economies of scale refers to decreases in average cost of production over the long run as a firm increases all of its factors of production. And this explains the downward sloping part of the long run average cost curve. Let me show you what I mean. And this is basically this part. So there are four key reasons why economies of scale happen, as we see in this mind map. Firstly, because of specialization of labor and management. As more workers get employed, they focus on more specialized activities. And this is why in larger companies, workers tend to focus on specialized activities in contrast to startups where people usually do everything. This focus or this specialization on certain activities increases efficiency and allows a lower average cost of output. The second point of why economies of scale happen is due to things like bulk purchase of input factors of production. As a company buys more inputs, the price per input unit drops. This can also be due to things like bulk discounts or unique supplier contracts, where the average total price or the average price per unit of an input falls if you buy more inputs from the same supplier. The third reason why is due to a reason we call financing economies. Larger firms may have lower interest rates and therefore enjoy lower cost per unit of output. The final reason why economies of scale happen is because costs are spread over a larger volume of output. Costs of certain functional business activities, such as things like marketing and R&D, they are resulting in a lower average cost if they are spread out over a larger volume of output. So in contrast to economies of scale, this phenomenon called diseconomies of scale can also occur, and this is reflected in the upward sloping section of the long-run average cost curve. So there are two main reasons why diseconomies of scale happen. The first one is due to things like communication, coordination, and monitoring difficulties. The gist is that as firms become bigger, there could be more and more difficulties in terms of communication across different teams and different stakeholders. As a result, coordination, monitoring, and planning can also become more difficult and worsen, and this in turn lowers efficiency and increases your average cost. The second reason why diseconomies of scale happen is primarily due to poor worker motivation. Workers who are unmotivated become less efficient as a whole, resulting in higher average costs.